Well, hello again. I thought I'd create a review of what we talked about back earlier in the semester, back in September, about online learning as you're thinking about and designing and developing those online lessons for November 21st, or of course before. So, as we visited a while back, there was a couple of concepts I wanted to reinforce about fully online learning. And to start, I wanted to kind of offer that visual again about the fact that what we have called, and we still call it to a degree, this brick and mortar or face to face, although face to face can be via synchronous online video conferencing. So that brick and mortar would be in the building. And on the other end of the spectrum is this fully online learning, which it says computer, but it could be a device, iPad, Chromebook, etc. And in between, you have what this is blended learning. And it's increasingly now what a lot of people would call, well, that's just traditional learning. And that is there's things online, there's things that I'm watching video like right now, but then there's also, I go into the classroom, I sit down at my desk, and I interact with my peers and of course interact with my teachers. So I wanted to make sure that we're on the same page here. And what we're going to focus in on for these online lessons is the idea that all of a sudden a COVID outbreak happened again. So for example, I've been working with several different school districts throughout this fall, and I worked with one where we were going to be in the buildings Thursday and Friday. And all of a sudden, this is the end of August, all of a sudden Thursday and Friday come, they literally close the building. Now we've heard, gosh, due to the flu, Stafford High School outside of DC, they closed their building for the better part of a week. In Kansas City area, Shawnee Mission has closed several of their elementary schools. Generally, the rule is if you get above 20% of all your school population out at one time, they generally will look to consider closing the schools. And it depends. Every school district does something different. I think the Shawnee Mission School had about 25 to 30% of their students out. So we're seeing all sorts of different outbreaks. They say the flu is really rampant right now. So what are we going to do? Or the snow hits or something happens. So now we're increasingly going fully remote. And fully remote, of course, is that planning then for what are we going to do synchronously, potentially video conferencing, but also what are we going to do fully online. And this is a continuation of that in terms of this visual. And this is another visual that offers kind of what we do in the brick and mortar to what we do in the online. And that hybrid aspect is everything from flip to lab rotation model to station rotation and everything in between in terms of the blended. And of course there, station rotation could be I'm in a small reading group, I'm at my kidney table, and I have a number of individuals that are signing on to Newsela or another application, and they're going to do for the next 15, 20 minutes something very independently. Now, maybe the aide is walking through, maybe I'm guiding them, although I'm sitting at my kidney table with a small group of individuals, but that's still brick and mortar. Where that fully online is, I don't have access to them. They're in their home, they're in their bathroom, their bedroom, they're in their dining room, they're in their living room, they're in their whatever room. And mom or dad or some sort of adult, grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle, maybe even an older sibling is home with them because, of course, in most elementary situations, that's required. But of course, you may have something varied there due to whatever the obligations you see. All right, so that fully online is what we're planning for. And with that fully online, we generally have two different modes that we facilitate from a technology side. Now, increasingly, we have the learning management system. Now, that's for you folks, Google Classroom, Canvas, Seesaw, Blackboard, there's dozens, Desire to Learn. And that primarily, as we talked about earlier, and just like you know in Canvas, is that the shell is there, but then the modules themselves, for example, in Canvas, or the product that is provided, the PowerPoints, the Google Slides, the links to video, YouTube videos, things of that nature, that's all organized by the educator. And of course, Canvas gives some restrictions to that organization. But basically, Canvas is what is the platform, the learning management system, that, for example, someone like myself then designs and organizes, provides the links, the structure, et cetera, et cetera. Google Classroom, of course, is very popular for the K through 12 environment. But the onus is on us as educators to provide the product, to create the structure. And of course, the student then uses this medium to interact. So do we. And of course, the parents access this information, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's primarily what you're going to be designing for within your online lesson. And that is you're going to be thinking about the learning management system that you're going to be utilizing, the resources you're going to provide, how you're going to create them, et cetera, et cetera. Now, there are some content management systems. And so part of your online lesson development might be the fact that you want some students to, let's say, do a series of drill and practice for homework. Well, that will be on IXL, for example. IXL does great for drill and practice. Or maybe you want them to watch a video for a portion of the time on Khan Academy to do a portion of the presentation that then you'll supplement when you get on maybe for a synchronous session. So a bit of a flipped classroom in a way, and that is they'll watch something prior to them doing a synchronous session with you, and then maybe afterwards they'll do a follow-up activity that sits on a content management system. Now the content management system, it provides the content, it provides the actual lesson, it provides generally some sort of assessment to go along with it. It aligns with a standard. It's packaged where the student gets a sign in, generally it's for pay, although Khan Academy is for free. They sign in, they get a connection in terms of what they need to look at, and then they walk through fairly independently. So you didn't develop the content was developed for you, therefore a content management system. Now with those two things said, the learning management system where we build and provide that avenue, and by the way, the learning management system, we might link to IXL within the LMS. So therefore we're linking to a content management system within the learning management system. Fine, it's just how we design and organize. And of course, content management systems are meant in a way to stand on their own, where someone signs in, they move through a lesson, they get some sort of score, they're then assigned the next lesson, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Again, all that's created for us, kind of like a textbook online. But there's also a number of online lessons, the way we organize class. There's assessment tools that are out there. There's tools like Newsela, all sorts of different things. There's tools like Kahoots, as many of you said. There's tools like the technology tools that you've shared over the course of this semester and that you'll share at the end with the implementation assignment. So how do you utilize those? Well, that's part of that planning, designing. And that's what you will be doing for the online series of lessons. You are planning, designing a series of online lessons that will instruct a variety of students, including struggling learners and those who identify with disabilities. And in so doing, when you design that, you need to be thinking about, first of all, that student with learning disability. And you need to be thinking about all the different components that you've learned about the students with learning disabilities separate from this class, and think about the fact that, well, gosh, they're behind in reading, as Dr. Robinson is describing and you're experiencing. They have poor attention. They have poor executive function skills, organizing, time on task, structuring the day. And yet they're supposed to be independent and more personalized and more individualized. So how are we designing and planning for that perspective? They often need immediate feedback. We're there to provide that immediate feedback. We're there to prompt them. We're there to facilitate that. Well, what does that look like when we're not there? Yes, we can do so much synchronously via video conferencing, but we're not on for 6.5, 7 hours a day with all our students. It doesn't happen that way. It's asynchronous as well. So what are we going to give to mom or dad or grandma and grandpa as that role? What are the tools are we going to utilize to facilitate that level of self-monitoring, that level of engagement? Those are things you're going to need to design and plan for. In addition, reading delays, processing challenges. What are you going to need to model for the student, and potentially not only model for the student, but also model for potentially the learning coach, the adult at home? So it might be directions. It might be facilitating activity. It might be modeling an element of a strategy that you want them to employ at home. Something that maybe you would do face-to-face with in reading, but then you want them to model, see that again and again and again. That might be an instructional video that you not only create, but maybe you find that facilitates that modeling. Why? Because modeling, that walkthrough, the direct instruction, the explicit instruction, that's necessary for a lot of our learners, and they may not be possible without us developing something and planning something there. In addition, we have aspects to that listening and learning, the practice, the visual supports, all those things that are relevant to the face-to-face. Now, how are we going to design and facilitate those within the online? So again, part of it may be synchronous, so the presentations that we create to facilitate that, because just talking to them, that's that verbal processing, that's not going to be enough for them. In addition, what do we provide to them in terms of the tools we select, the lessons we select, the things that we develop, the activities we facilitate and have them engage in? That's asynchronous. So all those things go along in terms of not only modeling in this instance, but also the visuals, the text in terms of images and illustrations to go along with the text, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, that regulative formative assessment. Now, oftentimes we'll do that through a quick check. We might do that through some exit tickets, which, by the way, we could do that in a virtual environment as well. We might do that through some formative assessments. Now, it might be raise your hands. It might be some verbal things, which we're not going to be able to do as well because We're limited with our synchronous time. So what type of formative assessments can be created and utilized? And Samantha this week is going to talk a little bit about that on Monday in terms of some of our digital, not only tools we can use, but then when we collect that data, how we can organize it, understand it, and then make database decision makings from that. But Google Forms is a great example. It's free. It allows me to create a formative assessment or summative assessment. But the beautiful thing about that is, well, several features. First of all, the student takes it and they can immediately see the responses and scores. So can you. And you can create that as an automatic element. The other thing that can take place is, besides text, you can put in images, you can put in visualizations, you can put in links to clips that they can take a look at via YouTube and be able to then answer questions from. So that formative assessment is just not text driven, it can be very universal in its design. But the big thing is the student is getting not only you getting the formative assessment in terms of what's happening, but they get that immediate feedback. And you can build that in, as I mentioned a moment ago, with the automaticity. So you create a Google form, you create the Google form in terms of the questions, but you can also create the answers there, automatically scoring it, and the student sees how well they did immediately. And of course, I can do the same thing in many of my learning management systems. And of course, my content management systems, they already built those in. IXL builds in a quiz. They tell you what you've done wrong. They tell you, now, this is how you should do it differently. They give you the immediate lessons. You can do the same thing within your learning management system as well. All right, and then finally, of course, what are your student expectations and how do you plan and design for students that are third graders that have a learning disability that are no longer now face-to-face with you? So things that they would expect from you that you would normally give them in a face-to-face brick and mortar, but now you're only with them a portion of the time via video conferencing, and then there's a whole nother portion of time where they're asynchronous as part of a lesson, as part of a day. So those are a few ideas that I shared with you way back when in September. I thought I'd kind of reinforce those. And the next thing I'm going to share with you as reinforcement is that role of that learning coach. And that's another thing from playing and designing. So I'll leave you here thinking about playing and designing. How do we utilize that learning management system? How do we utilize the aspects of content management system? How do we utilize all those additional tools that you're uncovering that could be relevant through planning and design for not only what happens via video conferencing, which is only a portion of your lesson, and then of course another portion, if not a significant portion, is that asynchronous independent learning. How are you going to facilitate that, plan that, collect data from that, and then further design from that? So that's part of what's due, if not a lot of what's due, on November 21st, is that plan, designing, and organizing that in that template I created for you to be able to communicate how you'd organize a series of online lessons. Hope this was helpful as a review, and have a great rest of the morning or afternoon or evening.